Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next session. This is the second to the last session for Pre-Con Day for Dare to Be Great 4 Era of the Headset. And it has been excellent. There have been some powerful sessions going on today, as well as the rest of the week that we have this entire virtual event going on. And I'm just so excited to have everyone here and just taking it all in. Still trying to decide whether I'm gonna do a fifth one, so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. If the demand is there, I will do my best to answer the demand. So either way, this has been awesome. There were some internet issues going on. Some people are still having a little bit of those, but just know that on the replay, the recordings have not had those buffering issues. So it's actually recording crystal clear. Sound is great, video is great, everything is going good. So thank you, Crowdcast, for figuring out a lot of that stuff, and we will continue. So we've got Ashley and Jeff here. We're going to be doing their session called Beyond 911. I'm excited for this. So without further ado, I will just let the two of you do your thing. Thank you again for being here. It's an honor to have you speaking for Dare to Be Great 4 Era the Headset, and take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be here too. So basically what we kind of wanted to talk about is Beyond 911, or, answering that age-old question that seems to have plagued dispatch for years is, can we actually make this a career? I mean, most centers that I've been in, they have kind of been, well, it's kind of a dead-end thing. There's only a couple supervisor spots, maybe one, and that's about it. And Ashley and I are here to tell you that, yeah, we think you can make it a career, whether you stay in dispatch itself or look beyond it a little bit. And so we kind of going over that a little bit. Let me introduce Ashley first off. I worked with Ashley, now it's been a few years, but she spent nearly 10 years with Yavapai County Sheriff's Office in dispatch and worked her way up to supervisor. She is now the current emergency manager for all of Yavapai County. She went into the emergency management realm outside of dispatch, and kind of touting her horn a little bit. She's one of the youngest in the state of Arizona, as well as one of the few females in that kind of profession. So I think that emergency, never knowing what's on that other end of that phone, has helped her out quite a bit. Now she's dealing with it from an emergency management perspective.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Jeff. Like Jeff mentioned, we worked together for a bit of time, not only at the sheriff's office, but following that when he went into the private sector. But Jeff actually started as a volunteer firefighter, but then he realized that 911 was truly his passion. So he spent about 18 years working in comm centers. He was a supervisor for Sedona Fire before that department closed, or that I should say that comm center, and then he came over to YCSO and did that for a couple more years before he had basically created his own position with CenturyLink, now Lumen, and then has moved on to Motorola Solutions and has been making quite a career for himself in the private sector following 911. So he is a great mentor of mine, and I'm so thrilled to be here and teaching this with him.
So, and that's actually one of the reasons why we kind of came up with this idea for this course. Was I switched from CenturyLink to Motorola this year, and kind of we were talking about how we've kind of moved on past 911, but realizing that 911 is a career path. So.
Yep. So today we're going to talk about a couple different things. Obviously, ways you can be successful and build your career within the comm center, but also what that looks like in other areas as well, and how to go about doing that. But the important thing to kind of keep in mind as we go through this is not only is it great just for career development in or outside the comm center, but regardless, if you just kind of work on these skills, it's going to help you become that much better of a dispatcher, and it's a win-win. So it's you can't go wrong by just bettering your performance and learning more and networking and just becoming more well-rounded and getting that kind of big picture, which is kind of what we'll be discussing today.
So when we talk about careers inside dispatch, I mean, we have the obvious. You start off as usually as a telecommunicator, whatever your positions are in your agency. You work your way up to a trainer. There may be supervisor positions, or maybe manager, or the manager may be a sworn position. So each agency is a little bit different. And so how they, what opportunities there could be limited, but it could be that you're in a large agency, and so there are multiple positions. Moving up in these positions, even if you end up going outside the agency later or going into one of some of the not so obvious career paths that we're going to mention here, after that, it gives you more of a broad perspective in dispatch, and it can give you skills and abilities that employers, both in dispatch and outside, do look for. If you're used to being a manager or a supervisor, you're used to working with other people and leading teams. If you're a trainer, being able to teach people is very handy, and there's a lot of different career paths that involve teaching and training. So when you get into the not so obvious, a lot of 911 centers rely nowadays on GIS information. So some agencies, one of the ones I started with, we grew GIS in-house. We ended up having a GIS person full-time that worked with dispatch. And so we would have people in dispatch that were assigned to work with them. Not necessarily full-time. They were still answering the phone, talking on the radio and all that, but they would work with them as a project. So when it wasn't very busy, they could work on GIS projects. And as a result, they got some of the education and they got the contacts and kind of gave them other opportunities then for doing other things, and kept them also involved and buying into the center on what was going on. Same thing along the lines of being information technology or the IT people. We have a lot of those that support our CAD, our radio systems, telephones. And if you become, as I kind of call them, a super user, where you learn and you can help teach your people in dispatch, and you work with them, and then you work with IT to maybe improve your CAD, then that helps dispatch out multiple ways. One, it can help it while you're still in dispatch, making your systems work better for you. But it also helps then in the future, if you do go down a career path, maybe into information technology, and you leave dispatch, you might be supporting dispatch still. And having somebody that in IT that understands what dispatch really does is so critical and so helpful, because you can translate what the communications people are talking about with IT, and the other way around. Half the time when you talk to IT, you kind of need a degree sometimes understanding what they're talking about. And so that's kind of, again, just a way of improving. It helps dispatch, but it also can give you career paths for the future. Quality assurance. Nowadays, there's companies out there that are starting to do that outside of dispatch as a service, simply because we're so short-handed in dispatch. So if you do it in your dispatch center and you learn those skills, those are marketable later on.
Okay.
One more. There we go.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. So outside of 911, you got to kind of think maybe laterally, not in terms of maybe going over to another comm center, but there's other departments in your organization, and it's dependent on. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments. It kind of depends on your organization. So I worked for the sheriff's office, and so we had a records department, we had a jail, of course, patrol, we had evidence techs, and we had all those different departments that are opportunities for us to move outside of the comm center. But outside from that, emergency management. So I didn't even know emergency management existed until I created my tactical dispatch team. And once we created the tactical dispatch team, our bread and butter was really in deploying out to the scene of different wildland fires, because that's really big here in Arizona. and we would help with, comms. We would work off a simplex, just due to our geography, to help isolate that event there at the incident command post. And we'd also send those evacuation notices with the incident commander. And once we got integrated into the internal sheriff's office incident management team, we started getting invited to trainings at the EOC. And then I realized, oh, this is a thing. This is a career path. And so by getting involved, you're going to see those different opportunities. But as I've switched careers and came over to emergency management, there's a lot of similarities between like the Emergency Operations Center and what dispatch does in terms of logistics and resource ordering and such. But there's a whole bunch of different opportunities, and it will be specific to where you work and what kind of departments you have there. Animal control is another one. We've got fire, EMS, wildland fire communications. The folks that are our radio people, they just have that brain that is just geared towards radio technology. And that's a whole big world in itself. So it's really, your imagination is the limitation. And I think sometimes we get tunnel vision and we think, dispatching is only good at dispatching. How am I going to use these skills elsewhere? And you really can use these skills everywhere. But these are just some of the ideas outside of 911, but inside your agency, and that's still kind of tied to what we're doing and who we're serving.
And then, of course, there's always after dispatch. And I found that one out, and kind of let you in on a quick story here about how I ended up with CenturyLink or Lumen after dispatch. Years ago, and I do mean years ago, we were getting a new phone system in, and we had a new reporting software to pull reports from the 911 phone system. My boss, the manager of the center, put me in that class because I was kind of one of those techie types that understood reporting and a little bit of the database structure of how things work. So she was like, "You're the reporting expert for dispatch. In addition to your duties, can you sit in this class because we need specific reports for the state 911 office?" Sure, no problem. So sat in the class, and basically we had a trainer that was provided by the vendor, and the vendor trainer came out and they went chapter by chapter through the book on how to do reporting through their software. But they couldn't answer questions outside of just teaching it chapter by chapter. And she couldn't teach what the issues were, what we were looking for in those classes. And I finally went in shortly before lunch, and I told my boss, I said, "You're paying me overtime to be here, right?" And she said, "Yeah." I go, "Well, it's kind of a waste of time because the trainer can't teach what I need to learn." So she sat in the afternoon, was teaching the class when the teacher was coming in and training it. And she's like, stopped her because she's like, "You're going chapter by chapter. My people can read the book. Can you answer these questions?" The trainer couldn't. They were new, in fairness to that trainer. And so my boss says, "Okay, we're done. You can leave." Called up the project manager for CenturyLink at the time and chewed that person out, saying this trainer wasn't, couldn't teach what we needed to learn. So, hey, we need to move forward with something, a better trainer or some other type of system to do it. Well, that project manager, years later, remembering that, decided that CenturyLink needed a trainer in-house to be able to do custom training for their sites. And so they created a training position. That training position I ended up interviewing for because it sounded like an interesting position. I was still working at the sheriff's department. And in the interview, she tells me, "Your boss is the one who, helped me create this position after chewing me out." I go, "Funny thing is, I'm the one who told my boss about it in the first place." So you never know how things are going to turn around. And so when we start talking about jobs outside of dispatch, you've got jail records, evidence techs, victim, all that kind of stuff. But then when you start talking after dispatch, you're talking, what kind of vendors are out there? CAD companies are huge for hiring people from dispatch to do training because we know, because we've used the system. Not just a matter of learning, it's you've used it. 911 call handling, phones. That's kind of how I got into it. You've answered how many calls? You understand the system sometimes better than some engineers because you understand how you use it and why you want to use it in certain ways. Mapping, same thing, going along those lines. Audio recorders, training providers. If you look nowadays, there's a ton of different companies that provide training for 911 centers. And all of these have positions or sometimes offer openings. So going into those gives you that opportunity to use the skills that you've learned in 911. And so if you have a system that you like or that is that you're stronger in than others, keep working on that because you never know where it may take you afterwards. And it may get to the point where, 911's been good, but let's see what else is out there. I don't want to take people out of the 911 center. By all means, we want to keep them in as much as we can. But I take a look at the fact that I'm able to help 911 centers use the systems that they have more effectively. And by doing that, if I can make their life easier, I'm going to maybe keep people in their seats longer. So there's a lot of different opportunities there.
So how do we do this? How do we achieve these things? And I think that the best thing that we can tell you guys is to get involved. It's, there's so many different things that go into running a comm center and making 911 work. You've got all the technology, you've got your CAD, your phone systems, your radio systems, your mapping and GIS. You've got, like I said, emergency management and the EOC connection. There's how many of you guys have critical incident stress management teams? And just getting involved and being able to get as much involvement and just understanding of how things work is it's huge. And something that one of my previous supervisors used to tell me is there's more to life than dispatch. And I always took it as Ashley, you need to stop working so much and being a workaholic. You need to have a life. But as I have grown and promoted, I have learned that it's more than that. It's dispatch is a very important piece of the puzzle, but it is a piece. And there's other people that play a part in these different situations. It could be flood control, it could be the assessor's office, it could be developmental services, all these different components. And something that's huge for us in emergency management is we talk about the whole community and, getting everyone involved because it's not just the first responders responding. There's a whole bunch of people that play a part. And the more that you guys can understand the way that your local community works and all those different organizations, and how those relationships play a part is only going to make you that much better of a dispatcher, but it's also going to expose you to different opportunities. It's going to allow you to say, maybe I like mapping, maybe I like GIS, and maybe I want to learn more about that. Or maybe you want to learn more about emergency management, or you want to learn more about stress management and helping your peers after critical incidents, or even in the day-to-day operations, because burnout's not just for critical incidents, right? So just getting out there and exposing yourself to it. And once you start getting that experience and kind of getting an idea of maybe what interests you, then you can start looking to, what are the job requirements? So once I kind of looked at emergency management, I looked at kind of what the requirements were. I pursued my education in emergency management, but there was a point in time where I was like, well, maybe EM's not the answer. And so then I got a master's degree in forensic psychology because I liked understanding how people think. And we had a jail expansion happening. So I was trying to kind of prime myself for possible opportunities there. And lo and behold, here I am an emergency manager. So, it all worked out. But getting out there, be the person that puts in for all the trainings. I think one of my pet peeves as a supervisor was people were telling me, well, I'm not going to get approved for that. You don't know that, and I'm going to advocate, for you to be able to go to those. Of course, if you have one person putting in for 20 trainings, and you got to make sure there's, equity and all of that going, but put in for the trainings. I mean, you may put in for 20 and only get approved for 2, You got approved for 2 trainings. That's great. And that's getting out there, and that's providing you opportunities to get that experience, see what you're interested in. And all of that just helps you become that much better of a dispatcher, regardless of what you choose. I may not know, like mapping is not my thing. I love our GIS people, and but they speak a language that I can somewhat speak enough to get by, but I couldn't do their job, and that's fine. But at least I've got that working knowledge and that working understanding to be able to collaborate with them. Same thing with radios. It's an entirely different language for me, but I have enough that I am able to communicate what our needs are, communicate what the problems are, and have a decent understanding. And so that helped me so much, not only as a dispatcher, but now as an emergency manager as well. So get out there, get the experience. But as you start kind of figuring out, maybe I like this field, or I like that field, or maybe I want to promote, or I want to, start training people, and maybe kind of doing training on my side, like we know some fantastic people have done in our world here. You start looking at what those requirements are and kind of strategizing how you're going to go about that. You want to make sure you achieve those skills while you're in dispatch. If you're looking at making that leap, kind of looking at those job requirements. That is going to be different from agency to agency or organization to organization, but kind of getting an idea of what you're getting into is good to help you kind of get those skills going.
And so, when you're looking at those skills or looking at other positions, keep in mind that even just this conference is a great repository of different people from different backgrounds and different skill sets who are teaching classes and teaching different sessions on a myriad of topics that, some may interest you, some may not. But if there's ones that interest you, learn more about them. And then, hey, well, this person came from dispatch, but now they're out of it. Ricardo is a great example himself, just because he worked in dispatch, and look what he's doing now. He's not in dispatch anymore, but he's used his skills. He's using that information to do other things and bring in other things that he enjoys doing into his, profession now. And so whether you stay in dispatch or not, if you can take on those or learn those skills that you enjoy, and it can help you be a better dispatcher or help the dispatch center as a whole, then it's just going to make your workplace a little bit better. And then, of course, there's other organizations. You got APCO and NENA. They both have career sites that have different jobs. So maybe your small center doesn't have a manager position, but you really enjoy it. You want to do that challenge. Look at APCO and NENA, see what type of agencies have a manager position that you think would be interesting, and look at their requirements. Look at, do they require a bachelor's degree? Some do, some don't. Depends on the size of the agency a lot of times, but they may require emergency number professional certification. They may require other ones. Well, you can work on those in dispatch. A lot of agencies have things like a tuition reimbursement, or they'll pay for certain classes. You've got a lot of different things that you can look at there. Networking, again, conferences, education opportunities like this conference, great way of meeting new people. If you like doing it face-to-face, then go to an APCO or NENA conference, even at the state level or local level. A lot of times you can meet different people and maybe be in your state. That's how I kind of got into the private sector. Was I was going to APCO and NENA conferences, and I was talking to a lot of the vendors, including CenturyLink. And that's what led, found out about, we're having this training position. I enjoy training. And I've used both brands of the phone systems that were used in Arizona at the time. So that kind of gave me an edge. My boss said, you'd be good at that. So again, get feedback from other people who are in the business, as well as for a out of the business and in a private sector. So networking, I cannot stress enough. The more people you know, the better off you are. Even if you stay in dispatch, you learn about new things, new techniques. Just a great way to keep moving forward. And even if it's online, somebody mentioned they can't wait to get back to a conference. And, with COVID and everything else, online conferences are big, like this one. So you can still talk to people, keep in touch with them after this is over. So when you're looking at other specialties, like our emergency management example, look at FEMA's website. There's tons of education that's free, and it's on FEMA's website. Or GIS, there's Esri. They have free programs, as well as once you start getting into the more complicated stuff, then they have classes that they charge for. But you could at least get your feet wet. Maybe decide, like I did, that GIS is not for me. I'm not going to make that a career. But that's how, I learned a little bit of it so that I could actually, as it turned out, was a supervisor over a GIS person. And that gave me the knowledge that I could interact with them and understand them enough to help them do their job, which meant they supported the dispatch center better. So.
And a note on the FEMA classes, yes, they are typically emergency management or incident command system kind of centric, which I'm sure a lot of you have taken the very glorious ICS 100 and 200 and all those fun bundles of joy. But there's a lot of classes in there. There's stuff on effective communication, leadership, and kind of the I don't want to call them generic classes, but they're the classes that we all need that transcend any field that you may be working in.
So the network. Yeah, I think I've already mentioned that, but it is so critical. That sometimes it's not what you know, but it's who you know. And while that's kind of a sad fact, and people look at it in a negative light, it is actually a positive light. If they know you, and they know you're a hard worker, or that you are very familiar with the 911 system and how dispatch works, they will reach out to you and ask you questions and look for help from you, as well as you having somebody maybe to go to and ask for help. So just the network is, again, so critical.
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, conferences like this are huge. Being able to, even though we're all virtual, being able to connect with one another. And, if you guys have questions for us or want to pick our brains, that's a network that we'll be creating. That's, a connection to be able to help one another. Huge with APCO. But, there's one that I really, really love is honestly Facebook. As much as we may give social media a bunch of crap, there's so many different Facebook pages for 911 and for dispatch. And I've been able to connect with some phenomenal people that way and just be able to collaborate, share presentations and training material. And that is one of the most amazing things about this world is we have such an amazing community and being able to help one another. And so being able to connect that way, I think is huge. It is so huge. So, that's definitely appeal to the social media for anyone who might not be pro social media. But being able to get out there, I think, look at your comm center, and sometimes we kind of look at ourselves or what we have, or like, well, we don't have a training program, or we don't have, this type of whatever. If you see a need, fill a need. Try as best you can to fill a need. I know sometimes politics play a role, but if you realize that your training program sucks, and don't complain, maybe be part of the solution. Be like, maybe we can do this, and start, networking with your fellow peers here and getting some ideas, because there's a lot of stuff out there already. So you don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. You just have to tweak it for your local area. But being able to say, what, we're going to implement a new training program that's going to follow these standards. You're going to work to create a GIS position in your comm center because you see the need. And so you're going to fill that need. So you're going to get through that by networking, because we can't stress that enough. Connecting with people. One of the things that I did, because within Yavapai County, we have 5 PSEPs. And, we all have different policies and procedures. We have different ways of doing things. And I facilitated an in-service that was for the entire county, because we all have the same problem. We don't have money to send all of our people to training. And it's also kind of problematic when you can only send maybe 1 or 2 at a time due to staffing constraints. And so how do you pay to have someone come in and train you? But there's a whole lot of knowledge within all of our, the 5 combined PSAPs. There's knowledge in there. And so I would have bi-monthly in-services that we would host around the county. But what that also allowed us to do was to meet each other. We talk to each other on the phones, the ring down, whatever it may be. And, being able to collaborate from PSAP to PSAP and understand the way that we work, the way maybe they handle certain calls versus how we handle certain calls, provides you just with a deeper perspective and understanding all of that, just even neighbor to neighbor. And so again, that's another way to network, but you start talking to people that, that are maybe tied to the world that you're interested in, and get those connections.
And then briefly mentioning LinkedIn, one of the things I've discovered, going to the private sector, but even with the staying in the 911 field and staying in dispatch, LinkedIn is becoming more and more critical, 1, for the networking, and 2, for the human resource aspect, where they are using it to look and see what kind of skill sets people have, see what kind of an online presence they have, depending on the position, and, will this person fit our agency? What kind of experience do they have? And they'll look at that before they decide to necessarily do an interview with you. So you want to make sure that if you have LinkedIn, that you keep it up to date. Maybe revisit it, once or twice a year. Even if you have a job, that way you can go through and keep your skills up to date. Look at other people's LinkedIn who are in the same position that you're either in or want to be in, and see what kind of things they're putting in there. When I applied, I found out that they actually take your resume. Some of the larger companies, maybe like Motorola, or if you maybe do online, cloud services like Amazon or something, you start dealing with these very large tech companies. They will actually take your resume or your LinkedIn profile and run it through a computer that will look for keywords. And if you get enough keywords, then you might go forward with an interview. But if you don't have those keywords, you're not going to necessarily trigger that interview, and you may not move forward. So you want to keep your social media like that up to date, and obviously be aware that anything you put online nowadays is out for everybody, whether you want it to or not sometimes. So just be aware of that.
Education. This was probably the hardest thing that I had to deal with when I was a young dispatcher, was determining what I wanted to get my degree in, because I am a very ambitious individual. And so I knew fairly early on into my career, just kind of looking at how the hierarchy existed within my organization at the time. I could promote to supervisor, and then that was pretty much it. So I drove myself crazy trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, because I absolutely loved my job. And that was kind of the hard part, was how do I fulfill this internal motivation and need to work towards different things and be ambitious, but at the same time, being so hopelessly devoted to this job that I absolutely love. So it's hard to find a degree that you're going for, and it was a very, I guess, by chance, thing with my tactical dispatch team being invited to the EOC, and learning emergency management was a thing that I even chose that career path. But I know folks that have education in schooling, and they're able to pull the education degree and apply it as well. So as you start figuring out what it is you want to do, start looking at what those positions may require. A lot of our organizations have tuition reimbursement, even if it's not exactly the most amount of money as we would like to see, but there are opportunities there for tuition assistance. And maybe not even necessarily for a degree, having certain certifications. So, APCO's got their CTO certification. You can get your ENP, it's supposed to be emergency number professional, not EMP, RPL, CPE, etc. And then emergency management, we have associate emergency manager and certified emergency manager certifications that you can go for. And there's also education opportunities through LinkedIn as well. So sometimes it's not necessarily having the degree, but having kind of the experience. And so, one of the things that I've learned is there's, the folks that have the operational background versus the folks that are strictly education and theoretical. And so don't minimize the experiences that you have in 911. I'm sure you guys have experienced it as well, where you tell someone that you're a 911 dispatcher and their eyes get like super big and they're like, oh my God. And they think you're superhuman because basically you are, right? You can do some amazing things. You're multitasking, you're dealing with life and death situations on a split second, and doing all of the things at once. So you have a great skill set. And one of the best things that I think we get through this field is learning what's important now. We can appropriately prioritize and execute based on our experiences that we've had. So don't minimize the operational experience that you get in the comm center, because you get a lot of that, and that's very, very helpful. When you've taken those suicidal callers, when you've taken shots fired and that screaming DV, when you come into the private sector, you leave that world and you're dealing with situations that get people really amped up, and you have the ability to keep a level head and think through it because you've experienced, life and death. So the operational experience is huge. Just the education is more, I think, a formality for some situations. But it's going to be dependent on what you're looking for. But the education can be difficult. I will definitely admit that, but you got to get out there and explore and kind of find what you're looking for.
And part of that is, try if you're in a site or center that does projects. My centers always had projects. There was always things that needed to be worked on, whether it be the mapping, the GIS, the reporting, CAD. Always had projects associated with CAD in some way. We're updating something, route unit recommendations to the fire department, or evacuation plans, making sure those are updated and that we do training on it regularly, things like that. When you do those things, and if it's fun, you find out something that, hey, that was fun, look and see around, see what kind of career paths, might be involved in that, so that, they always say that if you find something you enjoy, you never work a day in your life, that, you're just having fun. And that's kind of what I've tried to do, is find avenues where I do those projects. Yeah, there's times when that's inconvenient and not as much fun, but I've learned through those projects what topics I enjoy, and then pursue them and work with my bosses to maybe get me education for that, or if there's certification associated with it, or just moving forward, whether you stay in dispatch and those skills become more useful for dispatch, or take them outside later when you leave dispatch. Either way. So seeking help. And a lot of times, of course, we've got the conference where you're learning a lot, networking. There's agencies and there's companies out there that specialize in resume building. And thanks to a layoff by CenturyLink earlier this year, I got to work with one on my resume and my LinkedIn profile and things. And that's where I learned some of these different things that have come up. And through Discord later, I'll share a document that's got some LinkedIn tips that I've kind of learned earlier this year to make your LinkedIn profile a little bit more professional, if you will. Include some of those things that HR agencies sometimes look for. But, don't be afraid to go talk to them even while you're still employed, and see what, learn about what the resumes are looking at now. It had been a long time after working in dispatch since I had to update my resume. When I went from one dispatch center to another, okay, that was pretty specific to that. But then to try and take it to another, maybe related but not necessarily identical per job, Well, it needed to be updated a lot. So learning what the more modern, if you will, in my case, resumes look like and how to format them. There's companies out there that specialize in that and can help you out. Same thing with LinkedIn. They'll take a look at what you have and try and move forward with it. Same thing with interview tips and tricks. If you're staying in dispatch, there's, different books and Amazon even that have information on hiring practices for public safety with tips and tricks on how to get through an oral board. Something that can be very handy if you're working more, going for outside dispatch, then you're probably doing more just interviews. But again, there's tons of reference materials, tips and tricks out there for interviews. Talk to recruiters. I have a friend of mine who's actually a recruiter. That's her full-time job, is she tries to match people in their jobs to careers. And she works with them, helps them figure out what kind of certifications they need or education they may be lacking, or maybe even career paths that they hadn't considered. And so as we deal with these kind of staffing issues, I think some recruiters, at least for the higher management positions, even in dispatch, are probably going to start getting more use because it's such a specialized field that they need people to match what those skill sets are. And so that's kind of what a recruiter does, is help match people together with the companies or agencies.
So at your agency, if you have openings come up for CTO, lead, maybe dispatch 2, or however you tier your stuff out there, put in for those opportunities, and solicit feedback from your interview panel and ask them, how did you do? What can you do to improve? Some people are very, unfortunately, we live in the day and age where a lot of the stuff that I think, we were taught maybe in high school, I know I was, where it's, interview techniques, what you wear to an interview, stuff like that, being able to be prepared. But solicit that feedback so maybe what they're looking for. Sometimes they want you to come in with a nice folder with your memo of interest and your resume and all of that in there. Some people are very nitpicky about certain things. So you can get that feedback after the fact and also before the fact. Are there certain things that you can do to prepare? And that also kind of is like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I'm really interested, which is always a good thing. So that's another kind of helpful tidbit. So when in doubt, ask. The big thing for dispatch is you don't have to memorize everything. You just got to know where to find it, right? But that applies to absolutely everything in life. If you need to help on certain things, understanding a certain profession, if you have questions about how maybe, maybe you're just even jumping ship to a different comm center because they have more promotional opportunities or whatever, talk to the operational people, kind of get a feel for what the job truly entails. Is it something that you really want to get into? And so I had already started, quick story, I had started on my emergency management degree. I was probably halfway through my bachelor's, and I came to a pre-fire meeting at the EOC, where the emergency manager at the time came out and he's like, if you need porta potties, we're your people. And I was so devastated because I was that dispatcher that was like the adrenaline junkie, like give me the hot tones, all the hot tones, give me the traffic details. That was me. And it's so funny, now as I've gotten older, I've definitely, I'm not as much of an adrenaline junkie. I do miss it from time to time. But it was at that moment, I was really concerned about whether or not this was something I wanted to pursue. But then, earlier this year, I was ordering porta potties and I just chuckled to myself. So, get that kind of operational, information from the people that actually know the job. As Jeff kind of mentioned earlier, be aware of your online presence. I'm definitely guilty of this, where I get really angry at something and I'll leave like kind of a passive aggressive social media post. People notice those in your agency. You want to make sure that you don't post things that are going to be come back to haunt you later in life. If you have a social media policy, make sure you adhere to that. We have terminated people because of things that they have posted. There's a lot of arguments about First Amendment rights and such, but we all know in this world we are held to that higher standard. So just be just cognizant of what you're posting online. And just also make sure you don't burn your bridges. There are, you don't want to, slam the door on people. You want to make sure that you are, remaining professional always. The rule that I kind of live by in life, and one that I try to implement as much as I could as a supervisor, is be the person that you would want to be in whatever situation. Be the leader that you would want to follow. Be the dispatcher that you would want if you had to call 911. Whatever the scenario may be that person that you would want in that type of situation. Be professional, because you really never know when things are going to happen for you. Jeff mentioned how, his training opportunity and working with CenturyLink was just kind of happenstance and was a long time in the making. But I had a similar situation myself where I had just barely left dispatch. I was working as a specialist over emergency management, and we were having a meeting with one of the managers or the directors at the local college, and who had previously been a police chief. And he works a lot with victim advocacies and domestic violence coalitions and such. And he's talking about how a number of years ago, there was a 911 call of a sexual assault, and how the dispatcher did such a good job at aided in the prosecution of the suspect. And now that they use it in training across the country. And he's talking to us about the call, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I took that call. I remember that call. It was a sexual assault, and it was a taxi cab driver. And like, I remember the time, I remember the console, I remember everything. And I had no clue. It was a number of years ago that I had taken this call. It was one of those that you hang up the call and that's the end of it, right? Come to find out that it's being used for training materials across the country. And that opportunity, meeting with that director, has now allowed me to help with the Dispatch Academy that we recently launched here within Yavapai County. Has helped me. I'm starting a public safety communications course at the college, and all of that was by one random call that I took and I handled with professionalism, like you do with all of your calls. You never know what's going to happen when, and so you want to make sure that you are always just being the best version of you as best you can, because you don't know what it's going to lead to, and that's the cool thing about life, I guess. But yeah, just people for help if you need to. Be very aware of your online presence and don't burn bridges. Those bridges are lifesavers.
And I think part of it too is obviously demonstrate your skills by helping improve the skills of others. I mean, as a supervisor, I kind of tried to be the way that basically I tried to demonstrate that I was a good supervisor by making sure that my people underneath me were moving up. I essentially wanted to train my replacement before I ever got promoted or ever got transferred or moved, went somewhere else, because I think that tends to demonstrate more of those skills than anything else. And one thing I've discovered from many years in dispatch is we tend to be insanely possessive of our dispatch centers and loyal. And after working in a center that I was supported very well and having it degrade to where I wasn't, and I still tried to be professional, that led me to switching to a different center when that other one closed. But the professionalism that I tried to portray, even when things were not going well, is what helped me get a position in another center. And while I hate to say it, but if you're in a center that is not supporting you and there is no way of moving up, or that your management is not supporting your people, then I hate to say it, but yeah, sometimes switching to another center or to another job is what's right for you. And only you can decide that. I'm not telling people to jump ship. I'm definitely not telling, doing this as a recruitment tool for Motorola or anything. It's basically, I loved working in 911 centers. I lasted a long time. But for me, it was time to leave, and I'm glad I did. And I think the positions that I've worked on kind of flowed naturally. And some of those lessons I learned, I wish I'd learned a little bit earlier in career, which is kind of why we why we did this presentation. So if you have questions that have come up, it's our contact information. Feel free. If you got questions right now, we'll certainly happy to answer.
All right. Thank you both very, very much for this excellent presentation. I looked over in the Q&A portion here. There were no questions, but the comments and everything, everyone was engaging, talking about different things going on here. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask the both of you was, how hard was it to leave? And I ask because now, and this is whether you're leaving dispatch, to work in the private sector, completely go to out of 911, or going from frontline to trainer or supervisor, assistant director, whichever. um, it's hard to leave, right? Because when I left, it took me a few weeks to finally decide yes. And I know I've said it many times, but I will say it every time. I felt like I was betraying my crew. Like I felt bad. I didn't want to go, but I finally had to decide to do for myself, and my family in that time. But also, it was knowing that by leaving, I was also, with everything that I was going to be doing, was still going to be helping those that I worked with and 911 as a whole. And it made it a little bit easier for me to leave. But for the both of you, I mean, how hard was it?
Well, it was probably one of the hardest decisions that I have ever made, because it I was like the dispatch nerd of my center. I absolutely loved it. I worked the most overtime, and I was so just in love with that profession. And I was finally getting to a point as a supervisor where I felt me and my manager were starting to understand each other better. I was starting to be able to work on projects that were really important to me, like reclassification, the excise tax. That's kind of a big thing in Arizona. Being able to work on those, but then I had to ultimately kind of reflect upon, my my personal development, and recognize that there was a ceiling, and I was not going to go any further than where I was. And there was always just kind of this unfortunate, the way it is in the comm center is that I will start working on a project, I'll have to shelf it because I have to, we go down in numbers and we have to go cover the floor. And so it becomes the thing that I really, really enjoyed, the project management side of it and working on the bigger picture to help, but not only the profession, but my agency and my people, was no longer there. And so I jumped ship. I went over to emergency management, and for the first while, I thought I made the worst decision, because my boss at the time. But it was it definitely panned out in the best of ways. And now that I get to help them from the outside, like Jeff has mentioned, and so that has been so fantastic. And I consider myself very lucky and blessed to have those opportunities, and I'm very thankful that I made that decision.
Awesome.
I think for me, it's the same. I mean, mine, when I first left, I worked at Sedona Fire for a long time, 16 years, I think, for most of my 911 career. And then I went to Yavapai County Sheriff's Department. And for me, the switch with that was pretty much I had no choice. They were closing Sedona Fire. And so, they basically outsourced dispatch to another agency, and there was no combining or anything like that. So I pretty much had to start applying for jobs. But because I was trying my best at the time in a very, very difficult, trying situation with, management I didn't agree with and a lot of different issues there, trying to be professional and trying to work with my peers at other agencies, that actually helped, because then the captain over at the sheriff's department was the one who approached me and said, hey, I know you're going to be looking for a job. Are you interested? And so that's how I kind of went to work there. And then I didn't spend as much time actually as I kind of would have liked to at the sheriff's department. I was working as a supervisor, but we managed to get a lot of projects done during my time there. And for me, I knew it was kind of a time to take a break from 911, just from a lot of years, a lot of stress, dealing with, probably a little PTSD and calls that, I still think of nowadays. But and then getting to going outside of 911 was just such a refreshing change. I will say that working for a large company is a lot like government. They tend to be very slow to move and don't want to move as fast as we'd like them to. But it's still tough. And then yes, I still miss the adrenaline from time to time, but I get it in different ways. And working with 911 centers still, I get to help them, and so it's kind of, I still say I'm in the business, even though I'm a little bit disassociated with it. So
I definitely feel the both of you, and I'm looking over here in the comments as well. Dr. Jones, thank you for the shout out. I appreciate that. And then, Dan says he can't kick the habit. It's funny the way you put that, because it does feel like that sometimes, right? It gets in there. And he says, I still dispatch part-time at my old agency. And Christy says, I've quit my agency twice and returned less than a year later each time. Now, 25 years later, I'm the director. It gets in your blood. Yes, absolutely. Definitely does. Mm-hmm. This has been great. It's been excellent to have the both of you here and to share all of this information, because I think there's a lot of times too where, people they want to stay, but they also, there's other things that they want to do, whether it be in the profession or beyond that, beyond 911, like your session. And it's good to hear this and hear other stories and see comments and stuff to say that it's all right. Like if you feel that it's time, it's okay. Yeah. It's okay to go forward. Yeah. So this has been good. People who are watching right now, whether it's now live or in the replay, make sure to get a hold of with both Ashley and Jeff if you have any questions or anything. Also, we're all in this private chat on Discord, and then there's a public chat for everybody in the Dare to Be Great channel, where we're sharing a bunch of different stuff. So if you have any questions or anything, you can also get a hold of them there as well. But again, thank you both very much. This has been excellent, and it's been an honor to have you here speaking for Dare to Be Great 4, Era of the Headset. Thank you.
Thank you.
So for everyone, we are going to be moving to the next one, and that one starts at 4:15 Eastern Time, and that is going to be with Dawn Shumway, and she's going to be doing a session called the Aftershock. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you all in the next one.